Say to the Queensland Government, I appreciate you'll probably come out today and say the 28 days is ticking again from the start. I will put to you that until the end of the pandemic, it's highly unlikely, highly improbable that New South Wales will ever get to 28 days of no community transmission, because that is not how a pandemic works. Queensland and WA have the luxury of closing their borders, and so they have a higher chance of having zero to few community transmission cases. But in New South Wales, where we have an open economy, people are getting about their business, where we're hosting major events, we absolutely need the community to be vigilant, but we also have to accept that there's always that element of risk.
The border battle continues, with the New South Wales Premier issuing a message to the Queensland Premier that it's highly unlikely New South Wales will ever see a zero community transmission goal. If you missed it, last week the Queensland Premier said she would open up the border to New South Wales on November 1st, provided the state had 28 days of zero community transmission. A pretty optimistic goal to make, even when New South Wales was on a no community transmission streak for 12 straight days until yesterday, when 3 new cases were recorded and another 8 today. But Annastacia Palaszczuk has stood by it, saying it should be a national approach.
That's the advice from Dr. Young, and it's not just the advice from Dr. Young. Remember, all of the health professionals got together and their proposal, my understanding, which was reported at some stage, was that 28 days clear of community transmission should have been a national approach, and unfortunately that didn't go to National Cabinet. I don't know why it didn't.
Palaszczuk has been playing the victim the last few months, even claiming she was bullied by the Prime Minister for urging her to make exceptions for people in need.
I will not be bullied, nor will I be intimidated.
Order.
By the Prime Minister of this country.
Gladys has stood strong on her stance that both the WA and Queensland borders should be open.
With the exception of Victoria, there really isn't a case as to why any other state should maintain its borders. Ironically, I noticed that Queensland and WA continue to ease restrictions in their communities, but they keep the border up. Now that is a false sense of security. You're better off getting those borders down, creating jobs through tourism and business, and generating economic activity and keeping jobs, rather than having this false sense of security where they're kind of reducing restrictions, making, giving people that that complacency which they have, which is fine. You can do that if you've got your borders up, but once your borders come down, you need to be careful on what restrictions you have in place and how you're managing the virus.
The Premier is also providing comfort to New South Wales residents that we were always going to see these numbers rise and fall when restrictions were eased in a bid to revive the state's economy.
Of course, we've said from the outset the pandemic is evolving, and what we need to do in New South Wales is maintain that good balance of keeping the economy open, keeping all of us doing what we want to do, however, with some restrictions in place to make sure that the virus doesn't get out of control. And that's always the right balance we have to strike. I believe in New South Wales to date we have struck the right balance.